Alrighty, we are starting on Daf Nun Zayin, Masechet Eruvin, and we'll continue till Nun Chet today and catch up to where we were. All right, we start with the Mishnah. Says Notnin Karpef La'ir Dibre Rabbi Meir. So Karpef is a kind of empty storage area, and so according to Rabbi Meir, when you are measuring the distance for let's see if we have a picture for Eruv Techomin, then you don't start with you don't start actually with the city itself, but rather you leave 70, and then after the 70, then you start counting 2,000. So he gives you an extra 70 amot all around, and that was just a storage area or garden. Okay, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Hachamim omrim lo amru karpef ela ben shete ad ayarot. Im yesh lo 70 ama v'shirayim v'lazo 70 ama v'shirayim oseh karpef et shetehen liot echad. So the Chachamim say, no, you don't automatically get a karpef around an entire city. The only time we apply the rule of that extra 70 is when there are two cities that are close together. And if this one was within 70 and a little extra, and the other one also was within 70 and a little extra, then you can say that those two cities are both have, let's imagine there's only two here. If between here, well, we'll see. The Gemara will discuss, is it 70 altogether or 70 for each? Right now, it sounds like 70 for each. So if it's 141 between the two, then we can combine them, and we'll say this is just some storage area called karpef for both cities, and then the cities can act as one, and therefore when we're measuring, it's 2,000 amot this way, and the people here can even walk over here and another 2,000 amot the other way. So that's Chachamim. We only apply the law of karpef between two cities, not around the whole city, as Rabbi Meir does. That's the first issue. And then the second, Bechen shelosha kefarim hameshulashin. Im yesh ben shenayim chitzonim 140 ve'achat ushlish, asem sa'i et sheloshtan liyot ehad. And so too, not only two cities, but even three cities that are meshulashin. Either it means in a row, that are three in a row, or some kind of triangle. Let's just say simply that they're in a row. If between each one of them, there's 141 or less, then, as this picture shows, then we can assume that this is also just a backyard, simply a storage area, and so then we can treat all three cities like one city, so that a person who lives here can go 2,000 amot this way, and walk all the way over here, and go another 2,000 amot all the way the other way. All right, I suppose it could happen for 4 and 5 cities if they are near each other as well. All right, that's the Mishnah. So I'm saying it's the middle one connects all of them. All right, so that's Mishnah dealing with this karpef. And so let's analyze it. First, what's the source? Amar Ravad, Amar Kera, Mikir ha'ir v'chusa. Amar Torah ten chusa v'achar kach medod. We're going the cities of the Leviim that you give them 1,000 and then another 1,000 amot all around for empty space and for planting. So it says chutza, which means towards outside. And so that teaches that you only start counting after you provide that storage space, and then you start the 1,000 and then the other 1,000. So that is the source. Okay. Chachamim omrim lo amru. Now analyzing this statement of Chachamim, what exactly did they mean? We have two opinions. Itmar, Rav Huna amar notnin karpef lazo vekarpef lazo. Chaya barav amar karpef echad lishtehen. So according to Chachamim, when you have, he says, you don't allow a karpef all around the city like Rabbi Meir, only between two cities. But the question is, when you have two cities that are adjacent, how much room can you have between them? Rav Huna says each one of them can have its own karpef. So for this one, it's 70 and 2/3, and the other one is 70 and 2/3, altogether 141 and 1/3. So if it's that amount or less, we can join the two together. Chaya, however, says that you only get one storage area between them. So between them has to be 70 or 70 and 2/3 or less. That's it. So he's more machmir. All right, we're going to try to bring a couple of proofs for each opinion. Tanan chachamim omrim lo amru karpef ela ben shete adayot. So from the first statement of Chachamim, right, we see right up here, he says karpef, singular. There's a karpef that applies between two cities. That sounds like only one karpef, and that's proof for Chiyah and a refutation of Rav Huna. Well, that sounds like a good refutation. How will he answer? Amar lach Rav Huna, my karpef, Torat karpef. When he says karpef in singular, it doesn't mean only one area. He means the law of karpef. But in fact, it's two karpef, one for each city. Why not? That makes sense. Each one should have its own. Olam karpef lazo v'karpef lazo. In fact, not only can Rav Huna defend himself, but he can only even prove his point from the next line of the Mishnah. Medikatane sefa. Im yesh lazo shiv'im ama v'shiraim ve'lazo shiv'im ama v'shiraim. Ose karpef lishtehen liyot echad. Shema mina. Right, that was the next line of the Mishnah. That looked like a continuation of what Chachamim were saying. So if this one has 70, and this one also has 70 and a bit, right? So that sounds like each one gets their own backyard area. And so that is actually a proof for Rav Huna. And if it's a proof for Rav Huna, then it's a question on Chiyah. So there's only one karpef between the two. Lematevet yubta de barav. Amalach Chiyah barav. Chiyah can answer that and say, Hamaneh Rabbi Meir hi. That must be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. In other words, the way he has to read it is, you have Rabbi Meir's opinion that says you have a karpef all around. Hachamim say, no, only one karpef, and it's only between the two cities. And then the next line is back to the Rabbi Meir, that if you have two cities for the Rabbi Meir next to each other, then they each get 70. Okay, it's a little bit harder to read. You would have to really, make a new paragraph here, kind of a new situation, and going back to the Rabbi Meir. But it's a possible reading, and therefore Chiyah was able to defend himself. Okay. Now we're going to still ask on Chiyah, if that's Rabbi Meir, Hatani le'eresha, noten karpef la'idibre Rabbi Meir. But the Resha already said that according to Rabbi Meir, you get a karpef all around. Even a single city gets a karpef all around. So therefore, obviously, if you have two cities that are near each other, each one has its own karpef. So then why would you need that second statement to say that when there are two cities adjacent, that they each get their own 70 amot? Then it's redundant. So we'll answer the redundancy question. Siricha, dime'ahi hava amina chad lechada vechad letarte. Kamashmalan de letarte Tere yahavinan lehu. If I only had the first clause, the opening of the Mishnah, then I might have said that you give one karpef for one city, and maybe only also one karpef for two cities. Right? Who said that two cities are next to each other? Maybe it's enough to have one area, and they can share. So therefore, the first statement has to say even two cities get their own. And if you only said the first statement, mishum de dechikata shmishayhu, aval hatam de la dechikata shmishayhu ema la sericha. And if you only had that statement, you would say when it's two cities together, this statement looks like we already had it a few dapim ago. And when we had it a few dapim ago, it was applying to one city that was breached in the middle, like a hurricane went through it. And over there, he also taught that you get 141 amot in between. This statement makes more sense in that application, that you would learn that not only one city where that gets something all around, and not only two cities, rather not only two cities that each need their own storage area, but even one city that had a breach in it. You might think that you don't need so much room, and maybe it's only one. Therefore, it has to teach even that case of two next to each other, two half cities, or also two full cities that are next to each other, that they each need their own space. Okay, so anyway, that proves that we need both of those statements, and so that fully answers the question on Chiyah. Okay, yet one more proof against Rav Huna. Tenan v'chen shelosha kefarim hameshulashim. So this is from the last section of the Mishnah. If you have three villages, im yesh ben shenayim achitzonim me'ah v'arba'im v'achat amar shlish, עושה אמצעית שלושתן להיות אחד. תמה דאיכא אמצעי. Oh, so it says in this one that if you have three cities, then 144 amot is enough to join the three cities. It sounds like you only have 144 because you have three cities. Haleka emsei, but if there was no middle city, la, then you wouldn't have 144, you'd have only 70. In other words, between each one is 70 for a total of 144. And so that would reject Rav Huna, who thinks even with two cities, you get 104 a kalpeh for each. Tiyubta de Rav Huna. He can answer this. Amar lach Rav Huna, hait mar Allah, amar Rabba, amar Rav Idi, amar Rav Chanina, lo meshudashin mamash ela ro'in. כל שאילו מטיל אמצעי ביניהן, ויהיו משולשים, ואין בין זה לזה אלא 140 אמה ואחת ושליש, עשה אמצעי את שלושתן להיות אחד. He says the case is as follows, where they're not lined up in a row, but it teaches us this following case. Let's say they're not lined up in a row. Even if they're in a triangle shape, he says we can imagine just draw a dotted line and put them, so in order to put them on the same line and on the same plane. And then if you would imagine the city actually being here, and if there was 144 or 141 or less and 141 or less between each of them, then we can carry. So even if the city is actually out here, we can still draw this line and use it, kind of imagine that it's in line and carry from here all the way to here, not carry, but rather walk from here to here, treat this all as one city and draw the 2,000 amot completely around it. And so that's the point of this clause. But even without three cities, if you had only two cities, you'd still have the 141 between them. And that's what Rav Huna says, you get two karpefs between. Okay, that's a pretty interesting law. Good. Amar le Rav Abaye, kama yehe ben chison la emsa'i? Amar le alpaim amma. So he asks, now how much room can you have between these two? In other words, for this space here, how far away can that city be? Can it be, as far as you want? Answer, no, it has to be within 2,000 amot. In other words, it would have to be within a distance that you would be able to walk between them. If you can do that, then only then can you imagine it being on the same plane. It's kind of within the same cluster. And then you can consider the horizontal space also to be connecting areas. Okay, so that's fine. But now we have a question from the Rainbow City, if you remember that from last week. כבטא דרבה ברד רבה, בא רב הונא מסתברא דאמר יותר מ2,000 אמה. He says, hold on, that doesn't make sense, because in the Rainbow City, if you imagine this is a U-shaped city and it's filled in, right? In that case, you're the one that said that if it's more than 2,000 amot, if the U is so tall that it's more than 2,000 amot, then you cannot fill it in. Right, and this one that is similar because you're also, imagine you're making a U, and so in that case, you should not. Why are you saying that you should fill it in? Okay, no, sorry. You said in the U case, you said even more than 2,000 amot. That's it, right? In the U case, you said even more than that. No matter how big the U is, you can still fill everything in. Now, this should be the same as the U case because, it's kind of, you can see a U shape here. So why are you limiting this case to only 2,000 amot from this city to these cities? Why don't you apply the same thing? The answer is kind of obvious. In the case of the Rainbow City, it's all filled in. And so it's one continuous city, and therefore it makes sense to fill in the U, no matter how long it is. But here, there's nothing in between. There are no houses. So if this is more than 2,000 amot, then it's just a separate city. It has nothing to do with these. You can't connect them together and, as a link, as a chain link, if it's so far away. All right, that's a good clarification. So he says, how about this way? How far can this be from this? altogether, right? I mean, we already discussed how the space in terms of the, if you draw the dotted line, but how much altogether? So he says, what kind of question is that? Kama yeheh, may nafka lach mina, kol shilu machnisim say benehen, ve'en ben ze laze ela me'ah, be'arba'a u'ba'achat u'shlish. Women, how big? Depends how big the middle city is. If the middle city is very big, right, and as long as the space between this point and this point is less than 141, and so too this is less than 141, then it could be as big as you want. So we don't understand the question. So he says, afilu arba'at alafim ama, even if it's 4,000 amot, in other words, you wouldn't be able to walk from city A to city C without the middle one. Amalein, yes, in fact, because the middle city is its own entity, and you can get to there, and from there you can get to the next one. It's a chain. אם יש בין שני ראשי הפחות מארבעת אלפים אמה, מודדין לה מן היתר, ואם לאו, מודדין לה מן הקשת. Oh, so this was all a setup for this following question, again comparing it to the Rainbow City. In the Rainbow City, there was another limitation that Rav Huna said, that if the rainbow itself is wide, imagine a very wide U, and from the tips of the two U's is more than 2,000 or more than 4,000 amot, then you cannot fill it in. That was Rav Huna's opinion. And so in this case also, imagine village C is very wide, more than 4,000 amot. So then you should apply the same limitation and say that you cannot connect them together. You cannot connect this village and this village if this one is too wide, because it shouldn't be any better than a Rainbow City. All right, that's a good question. Amale hatam leka lememad male hachaika lememad male. No, in the bow-shaped city, you can't say fill it in, but here you do say fill it in. Well, what's the difference exactly? It doesn't explain much. I think the idea is that in the Rainbow City, if you're going to fill it in, see, when the Rainbow City, imagine this is a rainbow, yeah? And now if you fill it in, that means you fill all this in, and you start the 2,000 amot from the bowstring and down, right? And that means that's 2,000 amot, and then you get another 2,000 amot from here up, right? If you have the rainbow. And so he says that is limited. But in this case, we're not actually trying to do all that. We're not filling it in this way and this way vertically, but rather our interest is to fill it in horizontally, right? We want to connect this to this line and this line to this line so we can walk all the way from here to here and 2,000 amot behind. So we're filling it in a different direction than in the rainbow case direction, where we want to fill it in also this way and that way. And in that case, he said, if it's too wide, then you cannot spread it both ways. Okay, so the answer is a little bit cryptic here, but that's one explanation of it. All right. אמר לרב ספלה לרבה, הרי בני אקיסטפון דמשכינן להו תחומה מהי גיסא דארדשיר, ובני תחומה דארדשיר משכינן להו תחומה מהי גיסא דאקיסטפון, האיכא דגלת דמפסקה יותר מ-141 ושליש. Says, hold on, how about this case? You have these two cities, Ardeshir and Akistefon, and we see that the people make a techum as if the two cities were together, because they're not very far apart. And that would however, the question is, how are they allowed to do that? Between the two cities is more than 141 amot, and you have the whole river that goes between them. So how are they allowed to treat this as one? That treating it as one means that you can go from this city 2,000 amot to the west, and then walk to this city, and go another 2,000 amot to the east. So how could they do that if they're so far apart? Well, he has an answer. Nefak achve lehanach at mahata teshura demiblai bediglat. So he went and showed him, look, submerged under the Tigris River is a remainder of an ancient wall. And so you see that the walls are in fact linked. So there you go, a little archaeology can get you a long way, literally, right? So that you can walk a long way. So in fact, though they couldn't see them, but the cities were connected and the space between them was less than 141, and therefore they could walk the whole way. All right, very nice. And then now next Mishnah, and going into Daf Nun Chet. En modedin ela bechevel shel 50 amma lo pachot velo yoter. All right, this gets into some very interesting material that when we are measuring in any city where there was a Jewish community, they had surveyors would go out during the week and they would measure 2,000 amot properly. They'd square off the city, do everything the right way, and measure 2,000 amot and put a boundary marker and say, here, this is Techum Shabbat, so that when people were walking around, going out for a walk, they would know until here is Techum Shabbat. So when they do this, is a specific system of the way how to do it. They have to use a rope that's 50 amot long. And then they do it 40 times, and they'll get to 2,000. But it has to be 50 amot long. We'll see why. Lo pachot velo yoter, not 49, not 51. Velo yimdod ela keneged libo. And when you have two people surveying, they should hold the string next to their heart. Why is that? Well, if I hold it up here and you're 50 amot away and you're holding it down next to your feet, well, then we're going to lose out a little bit of space because we're on different verticals. Different heights. So therefore, if we both do it at chest area, although you might be a little taller or a little shorter, but okay, that's just a couple of inches. So that's the reason for that. We have to be, we want to be really exacting. We don't want people to lose out and how much they can walk. What if you're walking and you get to a canyon or a stone fence? And impossible to walk there. This is no problem. Mavli'ah, you swallow it or span it. So basically, you don't have to go and measure all this down the slope and down here and up again. We only measure as the crow flies, right? Straight across. So you stand here, you stand there, that's 50. Don't worry about the canyon. That's called mavliya, swallowing it up or spanning it. Same thing with the fence, and same thing with a mountain. There's a little hill, don't worry about it, right? Just go on two sides if you can. And ignore the vertical change. As long as when you're doing it, you don't actually go all the way outside the tchum. In other words, let's say you're measuring, you have the city here, and you're measuring how far east you can go, and let's say if this is too far and you can't, you can't stand on two sides, so you want to go further north up here in order to find some place where you can stand and you won't fall in. So you can go this way or that way somewhat, but don't go so far out that you'll be outside the Techum. The Gemara will explain that if people see the surveyors far away, they're going to assume that is within the Techum. Wherever the surveyors are standing and working, that must be within the Techum. Now, if they're in fact only measuring something west to east, but they're using some area up north just to see how big this canyon is, but they can't stand right here, then people are going to mistakenly think that place up north is within. So therefore, don't do that. So, okay. So that applies like to a mountain. Let's say you want to measure the mountain, so you go further north where the mountain ends, so you can see how big the mountain is, and then kind of come back. Fine, you can go, but don't go too far. Don't go more than 2,000 amot, above, north of the city or south of the city. Okay. Let's say it's impossible to swallow it. It's impossible to span it. There's no place. There's no way to stand. It's a very long canyon or very high mountain. There's nowhere else to go. Then you use another system, which is midakerin or piercing. And the way you do that is, let's see if we have a picture. Is like this. What you do is one person would hold the rope at his chest and the other person at his feet. This wouldn't be 50 amot long, it would be shorter. But you do it in shorter segments, and you say, okay, this is 4 amot. Then you go and the next, and then another 4 amot, right? And so that way, that's 4 amot. And that way you add all these together and you get the horizontal distance and ignore the vertical distance. So when you can't just, stand on two sides of a canyon or two sides of a valley, then you can use this system. It's called midakirin, or piercing. Okay, good. So that's the second system, and that is the end of the Mishnah. All right, now how do we know this? How do you know that you use a rope that's 50 amot long specifically? Well, because when it's talking about how big the courtyard of the Mishkan is, it says it's 100 by 50. But the language for 50 is double. This is chamishim b'chamishim, which is strange because really it's 100 by 50. It says 100 by 50 by 50. Well, why do you have to say 50 by 50? So there's an extra 50 there. So therefore, we're reading it as if it says it's 100 by 50. And when you measure this, use a 50 string. And we use this as the derivation for other measurements also that we should measure with a 50 amma long string. Okay, good. Hi, hold on. We already used that extra chamishim for a different purpose. If you remember, this was a while ago. We learned that the size of a karpef by taking 100 by 50, and you take that's the courtyard. So you take 50, and the other 50 wrap around to make a square. In other words, instead of 100 by 50, which is 5,000 square amot, take the 5,000 square amot, instead of a rectangle, make it into a square. But if you make it into a square, then the sides are 70 and 2/3 by 70 and 2/3, right? So the chamishim by chamishim teaches you that you should wrap other chamishim around, make it a square, and then you get 70 and 2/3 by 70 and 2/3. And from there, we learn the maximum size of a karpef, which we dealt with earlier. So we already used that extra chamishim word for a different purpose. How can you use it now again to learn the length of the rope? So we answer, Im ken lama kira chamishim chamishim, my chamishim ba chamishim, shemat mina terte. Since it has the extra letter bet, not just 50 by 50, but 50 within 50, ba chamishim, that then we can learn two things from it. And so that's the source that you need a rope that's 50. Now we're going to also give another explanation of it. Lo pachot v'lo yoter, not more, not less. Why? Not less and not more. Tana, lo pachot mipnei she'marbeh, v'lo yoter mipnei she'mema'et. If you have something that's shorter than 50, then you're going to tend to pull on it and stretch it to be more kind of a short, 10 amot. It's lightweight, and you'll pull on it and make it and try to get a little extra. And then when you use that and add it all up, you'll be too far away, more than 2,000 amot. And if it's longer than 50, then it's kind of heavy, and then it'll tend to sag. And when the rope sags, then it'll end up being less than 50, or less than, if it's 60, less than 60. So 50 is just right. It's not too heavy. It's not too light. It's not going to stretch. It's not going to sag. You'll get a nice, accurate measurement with a 50 amma long rope. All right, and that's the length. How about what is it made out of? All right, everything is very specific here. Amar bi asi en modedin ela bechevel shel afsakima. Okay, by afsakima, amar bi abba nargila. Okay, these things don't help us explaining one word with another word that we don't know. But basically, it's some kind of coconut tree. The fibers of this tree are good for making a rope. And my nargila, Amar Yaakov, dikla dechad nebara. Okay, it's a palm tree that has one fibrous vine that's wrapped around it. This will be a nice strong rope. Ikadamre, my sam kima, Rabbi Abba Amar nargila, Rabbi Yaakov Amar dikla dehad nebara. So another version of that, instead of each one answering each other's question, is actually a machloket, and about what is afsakima. One says nargila, one says dikla dehad nebara. Okay, anyway, that's what it's made out of, some kind of coconut palm. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, en lecha שיפה למדידה יותר משל שלאות של ברזל. Yeshua says, really, the best thing to use would be a metal chain, because that doesn't have any give. It doesn't stretch, right? That will be perfect. אבל מה נעשה? שהרי אמרה תורה ובידו חבל מידה. What can we do? The Torah says, actually it's not in the Torah, it's in the Nevi'im. Zechariah says, talking about, he's describing the future Bet HaMikdash, and he says, he sees someone with a measuring rope. Okay, so there you go. It has to be with a measuring rope. Ben Yechezkel, describing a future Bet HaMikdash, he's not holding a rope, but rather a reed. So therefore, we should learn from this that we should use a reed. Why are you learning from Zechariah? It says, a reed is much shorter. That would be good for measuring something that's small, like a gate. But for measuring long distances, you would need to have a rope. And so that's what Zechariah was talking about. That's where you use a rope and not a chain. Okay, good. Now, since we're talking about ropes, happens to be there's 3 different types of ropes that we use for different halachic purposes. Shel magag, shel neser, v'shel pishtan. One from bulrush reed, one from the fibrous palm vines, and another one we can use from flax. What are each one used for? The first one, shel magag la para ditnan kefatuha bechevel hamagag untanuha al gab ma'arachata. When we have the para aduma and we have to burn the whole thing, so it has to be bound up in a certain way, and we want to use rope that will not make it tameh. So this rope is not mekabel tum'ah, and so this is good to use for helping in burning the para aduma. Shonesarim lasota ditnan. Regarding sota, the kohen comes and he wants to shame her, dishevel her, and so he rips her dress. However, he doesn't want it to be too revealing and come off altogether. So after he rips it, then they sew it back on her with a string. And so we use this nesarim for the sota. Shapishtan limdida, and the one for flax, that is the one that's used for measuring. Okay, good. Now, Haya moded vihigia. Mishnah said, if you reach a canyon or a fence, then you can span it and assume it's flat and just go right across. Medetani chozer lemidato, mechlad imeno yachol lahabli'o, holech lemakom sheyachol lahabli'o, umavli'o vesofe keneged midato vehozer. So since from the language that says you go back to where you were, right? It sounds like you're trying to measure in one area. No, that's not a. It sounds like, I'll go back to this one. It sounds like, you're trying to measure in this area, but you can't, let's say it's too big and you can't get across. So then you have to move up to another area where you can go across and measure the 50 and then come back in a parallel line, right? So that shows that you are allowed to do that since it says you come back to the place that you were. Okay. Now, tanena leha, and in fact, this lesson that we derived from a diuk in the Mishnah is actually an explicit baraita. The Tanura Banan, haya moded v'gia mida lagai. So you're measuring and you get to a canyon. Im yachol lehavli'o bechevel shel 50 ama mavli'o. If you can use 150 ama rope and span it, swallow it, fine. Here's a good picture, right? We have the city here. So we're walking, we get to this canyon. Let's say this canyon, the 50 is going to be in the middle of the canyon, so nobody could stand in the middle of the canyon. So instead, you just make a parallel line, a perpendicular line, and you go here, then you measure 150, another 50, another 50, however long it is, and you say, okay, it ends here, and then you draw a line parallel to this one that you made, and come back to the other side of the canyon. And now you know how big it was. Good, very easy. However, let's say it was all around. In other words, you have some kind of canyon that goes all around, and you get to here and you're stuck. There's no way you can't go here. The farther you go, the worse it is. And remember, we can't go too far because then you'll be outside the Tuchum altogether. So what if it's impossible to just make a perpendicular line and move up? Well, then in that case, you use the other system of piercing. And so you would walk down a little, you get a short rope of only 4 amot, and then you two people stand, one higher, one lower, and then go and cut up each section of slope, and then you can figure it out that way. Makdir, that's called makdir ve'oleh, makdir ve'yored, right? Then you go, well, down first and then up first. I says up first. What if you get to a wall and the wall is too big and it's just very long? There's no way, you can't go around the wall. And nobody you don't have to make a hole through the kotel in order to measure. You estimate. You look. You see how you know how big how thick the wall is, and then you keep going. Okay, it's very practical. So we have basically 3 different strategies of getting over measuring rough terrain. So is that true? Because we have another Mishnah that says mavli'o ve'chozer lemidato. Wait, why are you allowed to do all this? And why estimate if it says you move up and then you measure and then you come back? So why don't you always do that? You do that where you can, where it's possible. You can jump over the wall and you can get around it. But if it's impossible, then that's when you use the other system of either piercing it or estimating how thick it is. It says you can use this piercing method only where there is some kind of slope. But if the plumb line goes straight down, then you wouldn't do this. Let me get a picture. Yeah, this one here, this picture. Okay, right. If the plumb line, right, to see if the wall's straight, if it in fact is basically straight down, then you wouldn't need to do the piercing the mountain, like steps, but rather you'd measure till here, then you get someone to somehow go down a rope and get to the bottom, and then you can actually measure the bottom, and then come back up the other side, so that even if this is too wide for one rope, it's no problem, right? Just go down and measure the bottom. And because the slope is so straight down, you don't have to worry about the slope. There's no thickness to that. So there's no need to measure it as if it's steps, like in this case, where you would use the koder method. Okay, well, it's pretty straightforward. It's just telling you lots of different permutations and how to do things, right? Here's another picture the same way. This one you can just walk down. This one you would have to climb up and do the staircase method. Good. V'kama omko shel gai. What is the definition of how deep can something be, and you can still use this? Amar Rav Yosef alpaim. So if it's 2,000 or less deep, right? Then you can use that method. But if it's deeper than that, then we're going to have to measure the slope as well. In other words, if it's deeper than 2,000, then even a slight slope could be a problem. And so then we're going to have to take into account the slope and use some kind of staircase method. If it's less than 2,000, then we can simply span it or go down and measure it that way. Okay. Itiba baye amok me'a verochab 50 mavli'o. V'im lav en mavli'o. So if this is a different, we just said 2,000 is the max depth, but Abaye says 100. If it's 100 or less, and the width, the one from here to here is 50 or less, then you can swallow it because you have someone here and someone there, and you take care of the whole thing. But if not, then you cannot swallow it. So this sounds like even less than 100, you can't use the swallowing mavli'at method, whereas Rav Yosef said 2,000. So, well, which is it? Hu damar ka'acherim. So the Gemara answers that statement is according to Acherim. We have in the Braita, Acherim omrim afilu amok alpayim verochab 50 mavli'o. So Rav Yosef says even 2,000. That follows. He's an Amora. That follows this Tanaitic opinion that says even 2,000. All right, that's one way of resolving these two opinions. We have Ika Damre, another way of doing it. Of resolving it. Amar Rav Yosef afilu yater me'alpayim. This one is not more lenient. And according to this one, Rav Yosef says, no matter how deep it is, what's the difference? If it's really going straight down, then there's no width. So even more than 2,000 doesn't matter. You can use the method of swallowing it up. Just puts a rope straight across. So, and who does that agree with? Kiman delot ketanakama velo keacharim. Then we ask on Rav Yosef according to both opinions. Tanakama said 100. It said 100. Acharim said 2,000, but nobody says more than 2,000. So what's going on? How do we resolve it? Hatam she'en chut hamashkolet yored kenegdo, hacha bechut hamashkolet yored kenegdo. So there, when the Tanaim are giving a limit to how deep it can go, and they still use that method, that's when it has a slope. So therefore, since it has a slope, you have to take into account if it's very deep. But if there's no slope, that's when Rav Yosef was talking about that then you can be as deep as you want, as even more than 2,000. Okay, which makes sense. And according to this, everything's a little bit more lenient. Now, if it does not, in fact, go straight down, then how big is the slope that we have to take into account at all? In other words, how big is the slope that we can go straight across, and rather, sometimes terrain just goes, a street can slope up and slope down a little. You don't, it's not really as the crow flies, then you still have to go up and down a bit, right? So when do you call something like a hill and you can skip over it? And when is something simply a small slope of the street, and there you're just walking and you have to take you have to take that into account, and it'll be a little shorter. So here's the definition of the slope. Amar Rabimi arba. So if it's, in other words, if this line here, if this is 4 amot beyond where you're standing up here, if the slope extends more than 4 amot, then you have to take it into account. Otherwise, it's considered more like straight down. Okay, the truth is that it really would matter how high it is, because this angle would depend on that. But they're giving just one number that will be an estimation for all cases. Okay, now next part of the Mishnah, right? So if you get to a mountain and you can't span it, you can move north, and then span it, and then come back on a perpendicular line. אבל בהר המתלקט 10 מתוך 5 מודדו מדידה יפה. Okay, so what we had over here was how much of a slope for a valley. Now we're defining how big is a slope to call a mountain. And so the answer is as follows: if for every 10 tefachim high, there's 4 amot of a hypotenuse, then that is called a mountain, and you can go straight across it. However, if the angle is less, and there would be 10 tefachim for a 5 amma hypotenuse, then that's a very small incline, and that's not called a mountain. In that case, you'd have to stand here and stand up here and measure this way. In other words, you're going to get a little bit less, because it's not called a mountain. This is simply called a slope, just an inclined street, and that's all part of the street. So that is the definition, and you could use a little trigonometry and figure out what that angle is. Okay, good. Rav Huna bered Rav Natan matne lekula. Now, what we just said here, where Rava said, there's another version of it that applies it in a more lenient way, as follows: Amar Rava lo shanu ela behar hamitlaket 10 mitoch 5. So he says that you only are allowed to use a spanning method when it's 5, like hypotenuse is 5 with a height of 10. Aval behar mitlaket 10 mitoch 4 omdo veholech lo. But if it's bigger than that, then you can just estimate. In other words, in both cases, according to Rava, you only take the as the crow flies horizontally, and just a question of which method is going to be easier to use. And in this method, you can use the havla'ah and just put a string across. And this method, it might be more difficult to do that, so just estimate. But in fact, according to this, you don't have to take into account any slope at all. Okay, good. So that was the second interpretation of Rava. With that in mind, we're going to keep that in mind as we almost finish this discussion. So now, when you're measuring and you have a mountain in the way, you can move north, but not all the way outside the Techum. What's the reason? As we said, because people are going to see and they say, "Oh, look, they're measuring over there. Must be that's within the Techum," and people won't realize that they're just making a perpendicular line to go find somewhere that they can stand and span a slope. So therefore, don't go too far. Okay. Im eno yachol lahabli'o tanu rabanan. So if he can't span it, then he does the other piercing method, the step method. Tanu rabanan kesad mekaderin tachton keneged libo elyon keneged marge lotav. So the one on the bottom will put it in the lower down. We'll put it next to his chest, and the one that's higher up, we'll put it next to his feet, and they keep doing that. And they use a 4 amma rope. You can't use too long because it might be a big slope. Good. Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abu, en mekadirin lo be'egla arufa ve'lo be'are miklat. And so our final teaching for today, we have the next stuff already, is that this method of piercing, of going straight, this is the piercing method here, we only use that for Techum Shabbat, because that is midrabanan. And so therefore we can be lenient, and we want you to get as the maximum length that you can so that you can walk. However, for Deoraita laws, then we don't do that. Deoraita laws, you have to take into account both the horizontal and the vertical inclines, and that has two applications. Egla arufa, when you have an unsolved murder, we find a dead body, we want to find the city that's closest to it, then you measure all the mountains, the valleys, and all the inclines, because that's Deoraita. And also, the Miklat has boundaries around it. And in which he's protected. So he has to stay within biblical boundaries around the city, and that is also defined with including the slopes, because those are Torah laws. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen. Okay.